The quest for immortality, the desire to extend the certainties of life beyond the grave, is as old as Egypt itself. The pyramids at Giza, the wonders of the ancient world, were not just designed as the pharaoh's last resting place. They were the first stop on a long night's journey to everlasting life. By 1550 BC, power had shifted to a new kingdom, 500 miles south in the ancient city of Thebes, now called Luxor. To the west, in the hills beyond the Nile's west bank, the royal tombs of the Valley of the Kings were cut into limestone cliffs. Their interiors are richly decorated with hieroglyphs and paintings, signs and symbols that detail the necessary steps to attain immortality. Egypt's power and the grandeur that came with it were well established by 2500 BC when the Great Pyramids at Giza were built. The Sphinx was a philosophy of government set in stone. It depicted the king as fearless, cunning, and brave as the lion, and as crucial to Egypt as the Nile itself. The king was not just a political leader, but a religious leader too. In the minds of the ancient Egyptians, the pharaoh's power and authority as a king stretched far beyond the boundaries of his country and into the cosmos itself. After death, he would escape the earthly bounds of his tomb, board a solar boat, and sail into immortality. This vision became material in objects and images found in the tombs and temples as a way of preordaining a central idea. After a perilous and carefully prescribed journey through the night, the king would become one with the sun god Re.
The king becomes associated with Re in particular because of the idea that the sun is born every day out of the womb of the sky and then comes into the world and goes into the body of the sky at night. And the king in his cycle, in his daily comings and goings, is seen to be like the sun.
The idea that the pharaoh would be reborn as the sun god Re is described in paintings and hieroglyphs in countless royal tombs. It runs like a spine through the theology and philosophy of Egypt for more than 2,000 years.
A clear development begins in the Old Kingdom, in the 3rd millennium before Christ. There, at the time of the pyramids, the beyond was located in the sky. The celestial beyond was always the royal beyond, to which the king wanted to rise.
The vision of a celestial heaven continued into the New Kingdom era and was depicted in the tomb of Ramses VI, who died in 1136 BC. But the concept of an afterlife in the netherworld had begun to replace it by the beginning of the New Kingdom around 1550 BC.
In the 2nd millennium, a change took place. The main focus shifted from the sky to the netherworld because Egyptians believed that there, the actual regeneration, the coming back to life, took place in the world of Osiris.
Osiris, ruler and judge of the dead in the underworld, a powerful figure in ancient Egyptian cosmology. His origins rooted in an ancient legend.
Through some horrible machinations, he was killed and torn asunder and brought back to life as the world's first mummy, and magically brought back through the help of his sister and wife Isis. Osiris, because he was brought back from the dead, and because he was put back from pieces and made to live again, became the symbol of regeneration, and particularly was associated with the dead and with the land of the West, the place where most of the burials are, including the Valley of the Kings.
The cosmological landscape of the life after death was rich with deities, hundreds in number. The falcon-headed Horus, god of the sky and the embodiment of divine kingship. Hathor, sky goddess, protector of the sun at night. The jackal Anubis, guardian of the body, its divine embalmer and protector. The versatile Isis, goddess of fertility, patroness of magic and healing, and queen of the sky. Thoth, a lunar god often represented as a baboon, an ibis, or an ibis-headed human, patron of knowledge and writing and protector of the scribes. Great and small, the gods took different forms, usually human or animal in shape, and often both, all of them familiar to the ancient Egyptians.
When we talk about the hundreds of Egyptian gods, each and every one of those is a manifestation of something they associate with the notion of deity or God. For example, the crocodile god, whose name is Sobek. The Egyptians did not worship crocodiles. They worshipped, in this case, the force that they associate with the crocodile, who is one of the most fearsome and powerful enemies that they have in their world. So they want to control that particular essence, and they turn it into a deity that they can worship and offer to, and then get back what they want from it.
The Nile's fertile banks and the hills just beyond were home to birds and animals that fed the Egyptian imagination. They integrated them into their vision of the world that would follow. Like the sun god Re was believed to die each night. He is rejuvenated each day in the form of the scarab beetle. The beetle seemed an apt symbol of rebirth because its eggs were laid in dung, the ultimate form of death and nothingness, and nonetheless sprang into the preciousness of new life. The Egyptians hoped and prayed for certainties, that each day the sun would rise, that each summer the Nile would flood, that each winter the crops would ripen. That yearning for the familiar rhythms and cycles of life evolved into a complex system of customs and practices. It reached its zenith in the New Kingdom, a period of great expansion of Egyptian power. The charismatic king, Thutmose III, aggressively expanded Egypt's borders. He pushed north into Syria and Palestine, and south, tightening control over Nubia and securing its gold mines. That gold was a source of wealth that would fill the coffers and enrich the tombs of the New Kingdom. It would also finance great public works at Karnak, like the Festival Hall, also known as a temple of millions of years, and embellish the public image of Thutmose III. Thutmose III ruled from 1479 to 1425 BC and embodied the strong central authority that characterized the New Kingdom. The pharaohs of the New Kingdom were just as intent on establishing order and certainty in the afterlife. Across the Nile from Thebes, due west, they found the perfect staging area for their quest for immortality.
The west side of the Nile is, for the Egyptians, is of course where the sun sets, where the journey to the next world starts. To be on the west side is directly related to the fact that the sun's journey is what we're following. At the end of each day, the sun sets in the west and then travels backwards to the eastern horizon to rise the next morning.
Tucked beneath a peak called El Kern that may have appealed to them because of its resemblance to a pyramid, the pharaohs of the New Kingdom began to construct a cemetery of royal tombs carved into the limestone hillsides. Preparations for the tomb began just as soon as the king assumed power, permitting time for the elaborate construction throughout his reign. Nearby, a set of smaller tombs began to take shape. Final resting place for nobles whose service to the king was acknowledged by close access to their master for eternity. The tombs of the nobles were less elaborate, but they also displayed a desire to retain their status in the next world. and they were cut just as deeply into the hillsides. The tomb of Senefer, mayor of Thebes, depicts Senefer and his wife Sene united eternally in the afterlife. On the ceilings, arbors heavy with ripening grapes evoke the vineyards of Osiris, a source of vitality and regeneration in the next world. Deir el-Medina, a village constructed for artisans who worked in the Valley of the Kings, contains a scattering of smaller tombs they built for themselves. Wall paintings in the tomb of Sennacherib, overseer of the artisans, display the piety of Sennacherib and his wife as they worship the gods of the underworld. The sarcophagus of Sennacherib's son, Khonsu, attests to that yearning for the continuation of life after death. The surfaces of the sarcophagus are richly covered in hieroglyphs and images, a detailed account of the pieties and rites necessary for passage to an eternal life. Khonsu himself is pictured worshiping two lions, images representing the past and the future. The journey to immortality began with mummification, an attempt to preserve the body as an eternal vessel for the soul. These practices continued for centuries. In the mid-5th century BC, the Greek historian Herodotus detailed the process of embalming.
First, with a crooked iron tool, they draw out the brain through the nostrils. After this, they make a cut along the side and take out the whole contents of the belly. Then they fill the belly with myrrh and sew it together again. They keep it covered up in natron salts for 70 days.
4 jars were made ready, one each for the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines. The jars were then placed in a chest. Ornamental plaques made of precious metal might be placed over the incision where the vital organs were removed. After embalming, mummies of kings and the upper echelons of Egyptian society were elaborately dressed with mummy nets and intricate jewelry. They depicted the solar boat and the gods on board as symbols of kingly power. The mummies were often adorned and protected with precious metals, their fingers and toes sheathed in gold, their faces covered with luminous masks.
The color of the gold is the color of the rays of the sun. So the gold became something connected with royalty. See, the gold was the material of the gods. Gold had a very, very important significance religiously and theologically.
Color carried special significance in ancient Egyptian funeral rituals. The red granite used in this sarcophagus was also associated with the sun. Black stone, the color of the fertile soil of the Nile Valley, carried with it associations of resurrection and rebirth, and often referred to eternal life. Fully prepared and adorned, the mummies were then placed in coffins. They were made from precious metals or carved in gilded woods. Coffins housed the deceased and provided another vessel for their spirit. They were inscribed with images of deities, another layer of protection to ensure safe passage into the netherworld. The mummy was now prepared for its westward journey across the Nile. Judging by the scenes of funeral processions in the tomb of the noble Ramosa, the bereaved dealt with the expression of grief much as we do today. But there was a major difference. Egyptians bearing offerings, food, wine, clothing, furniture, joined the funeral procession. Representations of these provisions weren't just pictures. Egyptians believed what they depicted would come into being.
I think it's important when you look at objects from an Egyptian tomb including the decorations on the walls and the mummy itself, and even the elements of food and furniture, to remember that all of it was functional. Functional not in the way that we would think about used in daily life. Now, some of those pieces indeed, or elements, items of tomb equipment, could indeed be used in daily life and then be reused in the burial. But everything was intended to function magically in the next world.
The royal tombs were hidden from view. There was generally a series of descending shafts, some richly decorated, followed by an antechamber, and then the burial chamber. The coffins were placed into monumental sarcophagi. These massive containers protected the pharaoh from grave robbers in this life and his enemies in the netherworld. The tombs also included eusheptes, small lifelike figures that performed work for the deceased, acting as servants in the afterworld. By around 1000 BC, it was common to find hundreds of these eusheptes, one for each day of the year, and a team of supervisors to oversee their work. Boats to carry the king through the netherworld were also common in royal tombs. Funerary texts, guidebooks to the land beyond life, were a long tradition in Egypt. The Book of the Dead was a collection of spells, sometimes inscribed on coffins and sarcophagi, to help the deceased overcome the perils of his journey. The most famous spell centers on the weighing of the deceased's heart, presided over by the jackal-headed Anubis. The heart must balance with the feather of truth, the symbol of Maat, goddess of truth, justice, and harmony. In a declaration of innocence, the deceased must demonstrate that he has not sinned in his past life.
I have not caused tears. I have not killed. I have not damaged the offerings in the temples. I have not added to the weight of the balance.
Declared worthy of immortality, the deceased could expect to reside in the ideal world after his death.
The Egyptian had a fixed idea of the landscape. He had his Nile Valley with its canals and the bordering desert, and of course he imagined that in the beyond it would look about the same. But he imagined the possibilities in the beyond to be simply greater. That, for example, all the flaws connected with the body would be smoothed out, that the grains would grow much taller. Therefore it would be an improved life, really. Imperfections in this life would be healed in the afterlife.
The excavation of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings by archaeologists beginning in the early 19th century provided the clearest idea of the New Kingdom's addition to the funerary literature. A text called the Amduat, detailing the pharaoh's long nighttime journey into oneness with the sun god Re. The Amduat, literally translated, it means that which is in the netherworld, is a guidebook to the afterlife, and a secret text primarily reserved for the use of pharaohs. It was reproduced in full on the walls of the tomb of Thutmose III, who died in 1425 BC. The black script written against a lighter background suggests a giant papyrus wrapped around the burial chamber walls. It tells the story of a journey through uncertainty where time and space merge.
For the Egyptians, the notion of trying to turn time, that is 12 hours of night, into space is very complicated, both for them and for us, without any question. But the way they did it was to identify each hour with a particular region. So, and they would even name the hour as the name of a town in those geographical regions, and then describe those geographical regions. So that as you moved through your hour, you were moving through a particular area associated with it, and then you'd move into the next hour and be in a different geographical region. So it is confusing, but it is how they perceive movement during the nighttime through space.
To begin his journey, the pharaoh unites with the sun god and boards the solar boat. During the 12 nocturnal hours, they sail from dusk to dawn, from death to resurrection. In hour 1, the god appears as a ram-headed figure symbolizing the soul of the sun, and as a beetle, a symbol of the hoped-for dawn. He's greeted in the netherworld with jubilation. Deities raise their arms as he brings light into the underworld. The voyage begins in earnest in hours 2 and 3 as the sun god travels across the water of the netherworld, bringing civilization and order to the afterlife. But trouble is on the horizon.
In the 4th hour, the water dries up and he finds himself in his sunboat on sand. And he's also confronted by a strange-looking zigzag that runs through this 4th hour, very much like a descending shaft from a tomb from above. But in any case, it's blocking his way, as is the sand. And so at this point, we find that the sun god is challenged as to how he's going to proceed to move through the hours of the night.
The sun god overcomes this by turning his boat into a snake.
As a snake, you can move across sand. Snakes don't need water, obviously. So he is able to proceed by means of slithering as a snake boat.
The Amduat contains images that are also present in the tombs. The protective wedged eyes allow the pharaoh as sun god to literally keep an eye out for danger. The message that vigilance is vital to the journey is reflected in objects of all kinds that are included in the tombs of royals and nobles. In the hours to come, there would be much to keep an eye on. Hour 5 takes the sun god into the very maw of the underworld. The channel is narrowed by the secret cavern of the god Sokar. The falcon-headed god clutches the wings of a multi-headed serpent. Together, they hold back the hidden chaos that threatens to block the sun god's passage. The 6th and 7th hours are the dark side of the Egyptian psyche, the point where the sobering thought that salvation is a perilous journey is driven home with frightening clarity.
These dangers, waiting and lurking in the dark for the deceased, were pointed out again and again in the Amduat. The Egyptian tried to shield himself from these dangers in all kinds of ways, mainly with magic words. There is a threat to the sun. The giant snake Apophis tries to stop the course of the sun, but happily he doesn't succeed, and so there was hope for everyone.
Protective goddesses bind, cut, and punish the enemy Apophis. Now under the control of the sun god, the snake becomes an ally. The most dangerous moment has passed. A growing sense of calm and order is palpable in the 8th and 9th hours. Resurrection and rebirth appear close in hour 10. All forces seem to protect the pharaoh as the sun god Re. The 11th hour bears witness to the grisly cost of the sun god's triumph over his enemies. The falcon-headed Re is seen before a row of fire pits in which his enemies are incinerated. Goddesses with terrifying nicknames, the one who injures and the one who is over her slaughtering block, spew fire and clutch weapons to ensure the total annihilation of the enemies, a brutal necessity for Re's rejuvenation. In the 12th and final hour of the Amduat, the journey through primeval darkness ends as the sun rises in the east and the sun god is reborn. The fully fledged Re emerges as a beetle flying into the arms of the god Shu, who will lift the sun up to daylight. The dense texture of storytelling created by the combination of images and text makes the Amduat a uniquely Egyptian phenomenon. Together with other funerary texts, mummy wrappings, coffins, sarcophagi, and tombs, the Amduat protected the deceased and guided them through the afterworld. The pharaoh's successful navigation of the netherworld resulted in more than his own rebirth as the sun god. By ensuring that the life-giving sun would rise each dawn, the journey promised all Egyptians that day would follow night and that life as they knew it would continue.
I don't think that the ancient Egyptians were preoccupied with death. In actual fact, they were preoccupied with life. because for them life was so precious. But they always had this understanding or feeling that, that's not going to last forever. And they couldn't conquer that. However, they were able to find a way. And the way is very simple, that life is eternal. This was a very profound way of thinking for the ancient Egyptians, and it was something that lasted with them all throughout their history.